When you open up 3ds Max for the first time, you'll notice a ton of buttons everywhere. It tends to get people confused, and that's where people find that they lose most of this stuff. So I'm going to do my best to show you where the buttons are. My cursor has a little marker for you so you can find where that is. We're basically going to go through it. So navigation, right? When you first open it, I see 3 windows. I see my perspective window, I see my top window, I see my front window. In my perspective window, if I wanted to switch this to the top view or the front view, I would do T for top, Z for zoom, C for camera, but there's no cameras, F for front, L for left, right? Or I can go to where it says at the top here, for those of you that worked in Rhino before, I can click on the word left, and it'll allow me to switch back to a perspective view. Z for zoom resets it. Now, how I create geometry and modify objects is through this create panel. So the create panel is over here. Well, we call it the command panel, really. So the command panel has some tabs. It's going to be the create tab, the modify tab, so any properties or modifiers that go on objects will be here. A hierarchy panel is going to affect how the objects moved, rotated, scaled, things of that nature. So let's create something. To create something, I'll go to my tab, create, and then underneath that I have subsets. So I can create geometry, I can create shapes, I can create lights, cameras. Helpers are something that are going to help you do things, so I can link dummy objects and just move the dummy. And then under that, and each one are even more options, right? So under this I can use splines, which we know what a spline is from CAD. NURBS is something new we won't touch until level 2, and then extended splines. So really, whenever I'm doing create, I'm usually using the standard geometry panel. Then under that I have a subset, so I have standard primitives are your boxes, cones, spheres, geospheres, you know, polyhedra. Box, if I want to create a box, I just click arbitrarily and drag as if it were like SketchUp, and I can drag up my box, and then I hit escape on the keyboard, and then I can use middle mouse button to pan, and then Alt, middle mouse button on the keyboard will allow me to spin the viewport. Now you'll notice on the top view, I see that I have a shaded object. This one is not shaded. So to toggle between shaded, I could either right click on the word wireframe at the top, set it to what I want, or I can hit F3 on the keyboard to quickly toggle in between sets. Now if I wanted to modify the properties of this box, the second panel over is the modify panel. So the modify panel stores the name of the object, I can call it box. I can change its color. All right, so now it's a red box. Maybe I want an orange box. When that modify panel, if I don't have anything selected, I can't manipulate anything. So this is like Revit's properties windows. In order to change something, I select the box, and then I can, on the fly, it's like Revit's type properties, I can change the size of that box to be anything I want. Now, with this box, right now I want to start moving the box around. So to move objects, it's W on the keyboard. E is going to be rotate, R is scale. But W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. Now you'll notice with the box selected and the modifier panel open that if I scale this object, it is not affecting the actual size of the geometry. Okay? So it's still reading this as a 12 foot by 12 foot by 12 foot box, even though it's by no means 12 foot by 12 foot. So to move an object, right, with W on the keyboard with it selected, if I'm on the y-axis, I can click and constrain my object to the y-axis. I can go on the x-axis and constrain it that way. Or I can go on the z-axis and move it up and down. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. If I want to move it in a numeric form, go back to P for perspective, I can right-click. Here's my transform toolbar. We'll go through all the toolbars slowly as the time goes on. But up here I have a move and rotate at the top here. And under move, if I right-click it, I can move it in a numerical form versus a graphical form. Also, I can rotate in a numeric form versus a graphical form. Now, with this object selected, if I hit W on the keyboard, again, you'll see that I have what we call a gizmo. So I was moving my gizmo. So I'm grabbing the gizmo to move the object. I'm not grabbing the object to move it that way. I could, but I'm just like moving it all over the place. It's not set in stone. So I use the gizmo to constrain my movements. And you'll notice that I'm selecting the little plane on the X or on the YZ, and I can move the plane or I can move the box in that plane. I can select the Y or the XZ plane, and I can move it in that realm. Or I can select it in the Y-axis and move it in that realm. So it always stays in that planar form. If I want to copy objects, I can hold down Shift on the keyboard, and then I grab on the gizmo over an axis. And if I click and drag, it's now copying that object. Now, two different things. In Revit, we know we have instances and we have types. In Max, we have copies and instances. The instance in Revit is not the same as the instance in 3ds Max. They are two different things. If I click copy on this one, and I'm going to instance the one that goes to the top here, right? When I change the properties of its parents, so these are my children, I'm going to give them a different color so we know that they're different. They're the children, so I have the children here. You'll notice that even though this is an instance of this one, when I change the color, it doesn't affect that one. When I change the size, though, it affects the instance child, but it does not affect the copied child. Now, if I scale, and even if I go to the instance child and change its properties, it'll change the parent as well. If I change the scale, however, or rotation, that acts on a singular object level. Okay? And then it will change properties based on that scale. So I'm going to delete those off, go back to my original box. Okay. So let's say that I am looking at my object geometry here. We're going to create a massing of a cluster of buildings, right? So I have a couple boxes. I know I have one here, I have one here, right? Now I want to create a box that connects all of these together. Well, I also have snap toggles. So I can click on the number 3 in the toolbar here. So that's my snap. The next one is my angle snap, so I make both of them active. And if I right-click on the button, I get a new set of options. So I can snap to endpoint and midpoint. Usually I use endpoints and midpoints. I can also do the other ones, vertices, edges, segments, faces. I have multiple options. My options on my Angle snaps are going to be here. For this one, I have my angle snap, so I can snap to specific degrees that I want in a 360 form. Right? So I take another box in the Create panel, and you can see I'm snapping to the midpoint or the end point on my geometry, and I want to go from midpoint to midpoint to midpoint, right? And it will track a little bit. It's not like AutoCAD where I can do tracking really well. I have to actually make two objects on it. There we go. If I wanted to rotate all of this together, again, E on the keyboard is the rotate. You'll see that it snaps every 30 degrees, or I can snap every 50 degrees. Or I can snap every 2 degrees if I want. Some other things. So now I have a subset of objects. Well, that's fine. Now you'll notice that when I select everything, my gizmo goes to the center of those objects. If I select this object, my gizmo's at the bottom center, so on and so forth. But let's say when I rotate this, now my rotation is happening, whoops, my rotation is happening based on the center of that object. Well, I don't want it to rotate on the center. I want to rotate from the edge. So the third tab over is my hierarchy panel. So this works to move the gizmo. So I see my XYZ is there. On the third hierarchy panel over, I can click on Effect Pivot Only, and then I can move my pivot down to my bottom corner if I want. And the snaps work for this as well. I can grab and click and snap it there, snap it there. So now I know that it's directly on there. I deselect the Effect Pivot Only, select my object. Now my pivot point, I can rotate from that edge of that object.